Hi everyone, I welcome you all to the lecture series of microbiology. I am Dr. Anusha Rathi, and today we are going to decode a very simple topic and a very high yielding topic. This topic is frequently asked in your professional exams, becomes a very high yield MCQ from competitive exams point of view, and usually in the books there is a long table with about 7 to 8 differences. So let me show you the differences of endotoxins versus exotoxins, which you will find in your books mostly, and you will find this long table of 8 to 9 differences between the two types of toxins. And while we lose our brains trying to memorize and rote learn all of these differences, I'm going to make your life fairly simple today. So we are going to understand the concepts of the endotoxin and exotoxin with the help of one cartoon, okay? Just one simple image. And let me show you that image. This right here is the image which will help you memorize all the differences between an endotoxin and an exotoxin. So as the name exotoxin suggests, you can imagine that is a toxin which the bacteria is producing outside its own cell, right? Versus an endotoxin is the one which the bacteria is producing inside its own cell. Now, why is the bacteria producing a toxin inside its own cell? Before we go on to that, let's understand why are toxins produced. Toxins are produced by bacteria in order to kill other bacteria, to cause damage to the host tissue, so that they can lead to a lot of inflammation, cause disease. And whenever the organism is trying to cause inflammation and disease, it is actually trying to protect itself. And hence, as a result of it, it causes inflammation and tissue damage and destruction and diseases in us, right? Now, there are two types of bacteria, gram-positive, gram-negative, we know it. Exotoxins are majorly produced by gram-positive bacteria and endotoxins are majorly produced by gram-negative bacteria. How do we remember that? So you see that toxins can be imagined like a war zone because the bacteria is producing it to protect itself. So in the battlefield, you can imagine that there's a gram-positive bacteria who's hiding behind a thick brick wall, whereas there's a gram-negative bacteria who's hiding behind a weak wooden fence. So this reminds me that the gram-positive bacteria have a thick peptidoglycan in their cell wall. So they have a thick, strong cell wall of the brick, whereas the gram-negative bacteria have a thin peptidoglycan layer in their cell wall. So now I can easily remember the two images. But over here you can see a small little tiny gram-negative bacteria also along with the gram-positive. So I can remember that most gram-positives and some gram-negatives are shooting out arrows, whereas all gram-negatives have this ticking time bomb as their weapon. What's the difference? So these arrows are the ones which are being secreted out and exo the cell, whereas this time bomb is what is going to blast and is not going to be secreted out or sent outside like an arrow or a missile. Right? So to make your life even easier, let's look at only and only exotoxins first. So you must have all seen this movie Avatar. In this movie, they were blue colored people with the blue colored skins, and they were really, good warriors. And they had these tiny little arrows, and they had a very strong aim. And these arrows were also extremely fatal. And you must have also seen in movies the tribal people, they have tiny little arrows, really small, nobody can even see them, but they're highly poisonous. Even one single arrow can take down a complete big person or a horse or things like that, right? So that is exactly how the exotoxins of bacteria also work. So always imagine exotoxins like, intelligent missiles or arrows, right? So with the blue avatar people, you can remember the gram-positive bacteria. With the missiles and arrows, you can remember that they are secreted out of the cell. And with the positive, and you can also remember protein, that exotoxins are actually proteinaceous. They are proteins which are secreted out of the cell. What else? I had said that they are arrows with a specific aim, with a very strong aim. So these have very specific tissue targets. They have high tissue specificity. Whenever an exotoxin is released by a bacteria, it goes and attacks a specific target inside the body. That is why your neurotoxins which attack the nerves, enterotoxins which attack the cells of the gut, they are all very highly tissue specific, and they are all exotoxins produced by the bacteria, right? Then they are highly antigenic and fatal in small doses. What did I say? These were tiny arrows which are extremely poisonous. So with tiny arrows which are extremely poisonous, you can imagine that only a small amount of exotoxin is needed to kill a person. So in very small doses, they are going to be fatal, and since they are so fatal and even in small amounts they can cause a lot of damage, the body is going to really react against it and it is going to produce lots of antibodies. So highly antigenic is another difference we know. So body is going to take them very, very seriously. Right. So all the important points that we have for difference, we've been able to summarize in this table. Just simply remember arrows or missiles. Now, if there is a missile or there's an arrow who has all these cameras and intelligent wiring and everything, if you put some heat to it, do you think it will be able to resist? No, it will go bad, right? So I can very well remember that these are also heat labile. Now let's look at the differences table. Yeah, and let's look at all the points of exotoxins. They are proteins which are secreted out, mostly gram positive, some gram negative, high tissue specificity such as neurotoxins and enterotoxins, fatal in small doses, highly antigenic and heat labile. Right? You understand that they are used in production of vaccines. Why am I going to use them in production of vaccines? Because of this reason, that they are highly antigenic. So because of the reason of being highly antigenic, means my body will produce a lot of antibodies. So I want to give such a compound in the form of a vaccine that maximum immune cells can be produced so as to protect the person in the future. So that is the reason we use these exotoxins in the form of vaccines. So you must have all heard the toxoid vaccines. They are all made up of exotoxins. So we take the exotoxins, weaken them, make them into toxoids and inject in the form of vaccines. You do know of very many toxoid vaccines. Please let me know in the comments down below the names of important toxoid vaccines which you keep reading, right? Let's move ahead. Now, the endotoxin is going to be the exact opposite of that. Now, just to remember and make your life easier, we can imagine endotoxins like suicide bombs, like suicide time bombs. So, you can see a gram-negative bacteria who has a time bomb strapped to his chest. Just like in this movie, you must have seen this guy was a pizza delivery boy who had a suicide bomb strapped to his chest, and he's wearing a red t-shirt also. So, it makes your life easier too. Right. Why suicide bomb? Because these endotoxins are a part of the cell wall, the lipopolysaccharide layer, which is only present in gram-negative bacteria. That is why it is not produced by gram-positive bacteria. In the LPS, the endotoxin is an integral part. If you remember, when we had read the structure of LPS, we had talked about the lipid A molecule. Right, that is the one which acts like an endotoxin, right? So, since it is a part of the cell wall, in order to be released, it has to burst itself. Exactly how a suicide bomb functions. If you have to kill other people, you have to burst yourself. So, the bacterial cell has to die in order to bring about the action of endotoxin. Whereas in case of exotoxin, the bacteria was safe. He was simply shooting out arrows which were exotoxins, right? And this is also heat stable. That is why we have the fire sign over here. And exactly opposite to the exotoxins, this is poorly antigenic and fatal in high doses. So lots and lots of endotoxins need to be produced in order to lead to fatal disorders. But an important thing to remember here is that this is the one which is responsible for the septic shock which is shown in our bodies by the gram-negative bacteria. So now the differences are very easy. These are proteins secreted out. This is a part of the cell wall, the lipopolysaccharide, gram-positive, some negative, only gram-negative, highly tissue-specific, not tissue-specific, but in septic shock where there is a lot of inflammation and damage and vascular leakage, etc., in that the endotoxins play a role. Then cell lysis is needed for the lysis of endotoxins, fatal in high doses, poorly antigenic, heat stable. And since they are poorly antigenic, there is no point of making vaccines. So they don't have any vaccines pertaining to endotoxins. One last point of difference which is remaining is that the exotoxins are plasmid coded, whereas endotoxins are coded by the main bacterial chromosome. Why do you think the exotoxins are plasmid coated? And it's easy to remember simply by the example of the missile itself. So arrows and missiles can be handed over to the other person, right? If I am carrying a bow and arrow, I can give it to you, right? However, I cannot take off my own skin and give it to you. So endotoxin cannot be transferred. from one bacteria to another, unrelated one bacteria to another, right? But exotoxin production can be transferred from two unrelated bacteria by horizontal transfer. And we understand that this horizontal transfer between two unrelated bacteria is done by the plasmids. We know this in the bacterial genetics. However, endotoxin, which is a part of the main chromosome, can only be transferred from the parent bacteria to the daughter bacteria, but exotoxins can be transferred from one unrelated bacteria to another through horizontal transfer because they are plasmid coded toxins. Plasmid coded toxins. So 8 to 9 differences, more than enough for you to know. Hope you enjoyed this session. Thank you so much for attending, and you can always reach out to me on any of my social media, my Telegram, Instagram or YouTube. And if you have any queries, that's it from my side, guys. See you again. Stay in the game. See you. Bye-bye.